hosting us for the next hour. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that this land that we gather on is situated on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Lenni Lenape peoples, and historically of the Attawandaron peoples, for whom this land was their traditional beaver hunting grounds. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. I'm really excited and pleased to be able to be here to host and introduce and converse with our three poets today, Julie Bruck, Tom Cull, and Deanna Young. And this is kind of almost a running up event, because all three of them are going to be involved in different events over the next couple of days. Julie Bruck will be running a poetry workshop later today at 3 p.m. Deanna Young will also be running a poetry workshop. Hers is tomorrow at noon. And Tom Cull, in his guise as London Poet Laureate, will be presenting and performing in River of Words, which is at 4 p.m. today. So keep those things in mind. Over the next hour, I hope we'll be getting acquainted with these poets by hearing their work, and I hope by inspiring some really good conversation. As we're talking, do think about questions that you might want to ask. I'll be reserving the last 5 to 10 minutes of the hour for questions from the audience. But we'll begin by hearing the poets read from their work. I'll introduce them briefly in turn. And our first reader will be Julie Bruck. Julie is the author of 4 collections of poems from Brick Books. Her most recent book is How to Avoid Huge Ships, which was published earlier this year. Previous collections include Monkey Ranch, which received the Governor General's Award for Poetry in 2012, and The End of Travel and The Woman Downstairs. Julie's writing has also appeared in magazines, journals, and anthologies, such as The New Yorker, Best Canadian Poetry, The Puritan, and The Walrus. Besides the Governor General's Award, she has received the A.M. Klein Award for Poetry, Pushcart Prize nominations, Gold Canadian National Magazine Awards, and a Sustainable Arts Foundation Promise Award. Julie was born and grew up in Montreal, but she now lives in San Francisco, where she teaches poetry workshops for the Writing Salon, offers private workshops, and tutors students at the University of San Francisco. She'll be reading today from How to Avoid Huge Ships, which speaks to the embodied experience in part of grief and loss, the pain of watching our parents age and die. It reminds us that life is fragile and temporary, and gives us a jeweler's eye on the details that makes us see things anew. Let's welcome Julie Bruck.
Thank you, Madeline. And thank you, London. It's very nice to be here again. I was here 6 years ago, I guess, and enjoyed it massively then. I'm glad to be back. I'm going to open with a new poem because I'm just sort of made that way. It's sort of an object lesson in how it's really pointless to argue with a second grader because in the end, they're always right. It's called 11. Her classmate's name really was 11, though I'd argued with my second grader that surely it was Evelyn. Evelyn of the itchy wool coats, Evelyn of drawer sachets, Evelyn of a certain age, way past 11. With Kleenex stowed at her breast inside her twin set, Evelyn of skirts over the knee, and old parents to whom she was betrothed, to whom her days were intended. Evelyn who passed gas when she sat for neighbors' children, who knit her own dresses in mustard or plum. Evelyn whose sensible shoes were always polished, stockings in a shade of leg moving purposefully through the dim rooms of her parents' home. Past ancestral oil portraits, tea sets in the cabinet, cut glass candy dishes, and always the sweet, sweet smell of rotting apples in that house, where it was always October or November. Evelyn of the cameo brooch pinned over what must have been breasts, though who saw Evelyn's breasts? When the last parent died, she sold the house and took a small apartment just for Evelyn, and grew old, moved to Ottawa to live with a niece and nephew. Oh, Evelyn, who grew African violets and whose cheek bore a similar translucent fur, what of your small, thin body for all those years, unseen, barely touched after your first moments on earth? Composed Evelyn, sometimes even playful Evelyn, whose name really wasn't Evelyn, and definitely not 11, whose brothers are 9 and 4. Her name was 11. Yeah. So I'm going to read 4 poems from my new book, from How to Avoid Huge Ships. You know, make you laugh and now I'll bum you out. This is called To the Bridge. It's set in Golden Gate Park, which is very close to our flat in San Francisco. To the Bridge. 18 or 19, unshaven, with backpack. He stops me on the quiet park trail, asks, where can I send him that's more secluded? Is there a place where no one goes? We're alone on the path, and I'm trained to give him anything he wants. Walk west, I say, towards the ocean. It's only a mile, maybe 2, hoping that's the end of it. Can you repeat that? He asks. Finally, I retrieve my hands from deep fleece pockets and point. There, go down the hill. Keep walking. See those woods? That's west. He thanks me, turns away, while the rest of us keep following designated trails in our branded athletic shoes, measuring what remains of an afternoon. Light pokes accusatory fingers into every crevice. Someone's son walks west, gaining on the Golden Gate Bridge, where so many beautiful boys fly. I may have drawn this one a map. Also Golden Gate Park. Fledgling. There's a lot of birds in this book, and I really can't account for it. I'm not a bird watcher, but there are a lot of birds. Fledgling. 4 mounted police pass on the sidewalk. Such unlikely traction of those iron-shod hooves. 16 bells striking the pavement. My old father is failing, and I'm not there. I'm watching wind play the horses' tails, shaken trees release curtains of white apple blossom, and 4 midnight blue helmets recede into that whiteness as if into snow. My father labors to breathe. 2 Canada geese perch high in a redwood on black rubber feet, seeming stunned to have reached that height, or maybe by what's next. If I book a flight now, I'll be there tomorrow. A heron stumbles from his nest out along the cypress branch like a prehistoric drunk. Not one of these big birds looks flight-enabled, though they are. I am holding my ground, fixed as a penguin asked to multitask while cradling an egg between its feet. What am I waiting for? A parent to return and throw up into my open beak? My father is dying. I have a valid passport, a credit card. Finally, I ran, then I flew. It's weird to be, I'm going to read a poem that was occasioned by my mother, whose dementia was progressing quickly at the time, watching the aftermath of the Malaysia air crash, which was probably 4 years ago. And it was so weird that there was this similar incident this week with this description of the relatives could almost be from this week. It's kind of uncanny. It's called When My Mother Tracked Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. At last she'd found her flock, the lost at sea, their family members wailing in airport chapels for souls beyond hearing. Past speech by then, she was fixed upon those weeping relatives, the starred ocean maps, the CNN desk anchors droning, mystery plane, day 21, day 22, hour after hour. You do know, don't you, I heard myself say, these people aren't ever going to be found alive. She swiveled her head to face me then, brown eyes filling with what I first took to be despair. It wasn't despair, it was hatred. If she kept watch, there could be rescue. Survivors pulled up dripping, then wrapped in thermal blankets, restored, even reborn. It was as if I'd placed my hands on her shoulders and held her underwater as she stared up at the one she thought would always have her back, the daughter who was drowning her. And I'll end with something a little more upbeat. There's some actually quite, there's some unbridled hilarity in this book. But not this morning. When I was 6, I got ill and, not, seriously ill, but I got a very, very high fever and hallucinated that I was a cowgirl. And when I woke up, it stuck. And this poem is also about, Philip Larkin has a poem in which he asks, what are days for? And this is my answer to that question. It's called To Bring the Horse Home. To bring the horse home is all I've wanted past wanting since I was 6 and delirious with fever, an infinitive forged from a night when giant ladybugs with toothpick antennae patrolled my wicker nightstand. Yes, I've been with horses since, traveled illegally with them in trailers, known certain landscapes only framed by alert ears, spent whole afternoons with one in particular, her big jaw heavy on my shoulder. Still, I hatched plots to bring a horse to the house, to ride to school, to pasture 1 or even 3 in the garden, shaded by that decorative willow which could have used a purpose. But there were city bylaws in 2 languages, and over the years, a dog, stray cats, turtles, and many fish. They lived, they died. It wasn't the same. Fast forward, I brought the baby home in a molded bucket seat, but she lacked difference, attuned as I was, checking her 24/7. Now that she's grown, I'm reduced to walking city parks with this corrosive envy of mounted police. Though I'm too old for the ropes test, wouldn't know what to do with a gun. If there's a second act, let me live like the racetrack rat in a small room up the narrow stairs from the stalls, the horse shifting comfortably below, browsing and chewing sweet hay. A single bed with blanket the color of factory sweepings will suffice, each day shaped to the same arc, because days can only end when the lock slides free on the stall's Dutch door, and I lead the horse in, then muscle the corroded bolts shut. That's what days are for. I cannot rest until the horse comes home. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is this working? It is. Okay, good. I don't have to go over to the mic. Our next reader is Deanna Young. She is also the author of 4 books of poetry. Her most recent reunion also came out with Brick Books in 2018. Her previous books include House Dreams, which came out in 2014, was nominated for the Trillium Book Award for Poetry, the Ottawa Book Award, the Archibald Lampman Award, and the ReLit Award. She also has 2 earlier collections, The Still Before a Storm and Drunkard's Path. Deanna grew up in southwestern Ontario, here in Middlesex County to be exact, during the 1970s and 80s. Although she now lives in Ottawa, where she works as an editor and offers private workshops, both Reunion and House Dreams return to this often quite dark place of her growing up. She'll be reading today from Reunion, which gives us an unflinching look at the childhood trauma inflicted by alcoholism and brutality, and a confrontation with the ghosts of the past.
Thank you, Madeline, and thanks very much to the Words Festival. It's such a wonderful festival to have in my hometown, and it's a real honor to be here. I understand that the loose theme of this festival this year is community, so I've tried to choose some poems that speak to that. I did grow up here in London. I went to high school here, and also I lived in Lucan for much of my childhood. So this book is very much of these places and that time, as Madeline said. I have family here, and I'd like to acknowledge, and I'm really pleased that some of my family could make it today, along with some old friends. So thank you all for being here. The book, by the way, is dedicated to my sisters, my mother, who couldn't be here today, my aunts, and my grandmother, who has passed away. There are 2 poems in the book called Reunion. One is long and one is short. I'm going to read the short one. Reunion. My small body then, at the top of the stairs, in its flannel nightie, bones gone to water inside my legs. While below in the guts of the house, the lions roared. A door was slammed, and all the downy sparrows, the messengers of luck, laughter, spring, confidence, and ease, flew out the windows of my ears, my eyes and mouth. The house now empty. Only the family of shiny black bugs living on what in the basement? The dogs asleep in the hallway woke and knew they'd been abandoned. I use some traditional forms in this book, which I haven't done before. I found some of these forms from the culture of my youth just started surfacing, and so I listened to them. This is called Ballad of Young John. He drives around the Legion twice. He said he wouldn't do it, but the night is hot, his brain like ice, and in his heart he knew it. He'd like to be the noble type that puts his family first. He knows a few who preach that hype, but they don't know his thirst. It's cool inside, the lights hung low, sunlight slicing through the blind. If supper's on the table cold, it doesn't cross his pickled mind. If he sticks to beer, he'll soon be home to salute the bejesus wife. If he starts in on the hard stuff, though, it could get ugly. It could mean life. Behind the bar, the mirror warns, "John, you've had enough. Take it easy, pal. It's under control." And the wife, she likes it rough. The spinny stars, the tacky breeze, a bloody lip, red spit, and then the car won't start. He's lost the keys and couldn't say who or why or when. He couldn't say how it all began or where it all might end. speaking to the theme of community, one of the voices that emerged during the writing of this book was the somewhat biblical, the United Church, sort of with strains of Methodism that I had forgotten was there, came up, and I wrote this called Sermon on the House. I'll try not to. I'm used to getting close to mics, and this you don't have to. Sermon on the House. As the native peoples understand that the land and everything in it has a spirit which must be respected, so we must understand that the house and everything in it, the plum doors and wavy windows, the water-stained ceilings and creaking floors, airless closets and narrow halls, all have a spirit that we must cherish. For as we inhabit our houses, so they, trusting, place their store in us. And let this be the understanding and the practiced faith and solace of the beleaguered mother called to raise her children in a house rocked like a boat on a wind-torn lake. In the long night of her misfortune, let her keep the faith that children require shelter from storms and shielding from predators, that they require secure and peaceful spaces in which to grow, unafraid and unmolested, into whom they were meant to become, and without cruel interference. For it is only in the rested waking, in the peace of the table and the daily bread breaking, in the routine of leaving and returning home unafraid at the end of each day, yea, in the steady confidence of days, and again in the chaste embrace of needed sleep, that children may endure and thrive. Therefore, praise be to the foundation, to the solid bricks and mending mortar, to the square joists and supporting beams, praise to the furnace and to the newspaper that is the insulation, praise to the rooftop that stands between the family and the indifferent weather, to the mailbox that waits, to the number by the door and to the heroic name of the street, that we may carry it with us like a coin in our pocket when we go, and may that coin give some small comfort to our grasping hands. But first, let us rejoice in the very concept of the house, whether it is there for us now, once was, or may one day be. When adrift on the wide lake of insecurity, then rejoice in those who call from the shore, who open their doors and invite us in, as we may, any of us, one day be wanderers in need of roof and cup. Rejoice above all in the firm embrace of walls. In their compassion and generosity are they wondrous, as the sky that gives freely of its light and rain is wondrous. Rejoice then in the benefaction of community, for it is community that shall be our children's saving grace. Yea, for the house and all it holds be thankful. Honor its spirit, for it is sacred. Care for the house that is your self and soul, and for the houses of your neighbors, for those beside you and those on the other side of the road. Care for the houses far beyond your fences, the shacks and tenements, the crowded tents, for all those close and distant. In this way, care for yourself and for one another. Care for the children and for the mother, and for the father who was once a child, forever and ever. Amen.
Oh my God. Wow.
This is called Lola. It's a prose poem, and it's for my grandmother. In the courtyard after lunch, residents take the sun, steel rims of their wheelchairs gleaming. Despite the specter of death lurking at the end of every polished hallway, the nursing home is a spiritless place. Before here, it was the bungalow in Elsa Craig. Before that, the farm, where for 24 years she slept beside a man she loved, worked like the devil from dawn till night, raised 3 children of her own, and fostered several more. Home, she still calls it. On a wet November morning, I dial the old number. Mercy, is that you, honey? I picture her recliner set back from the TV. Across the room, her roommate, a featherless bird of 90 pounds, is sunk in her own chair before her own murmuring screen. Geraniums climb the window, pressing red faces and green hands against the glass. We talk of relatives, the dead and living. Most I never knew or don't recall meeting. When it comes time to say goodbye, there it is again, the watery, "You know I think about you, honey." A rope thrown toward me as the receiver leaves my ear. There's a picture of us in matching aprons when I was 3. Me and this woman who never once wore slacks or drank wine, who covered her mouth to stifle a laugh when I told her Jiminy Cricket was code for Jesus Christ. Why do I never have the presence of mind to stop and ask, "What is it, Grandma? Why so sad?" The question pressing itself to my mouth like a hand. And in keeping with the theme of community, I'll finish with this poem called Recrimination. I stand here this April morning, dear citizens of Biddulph, and swear this truth. The cries that ran through that house were unholy. The clamor you heard and harm you suspected, the marks on the arms of my mother, your call to action. And yet you stood by. You closed your drapes and extinguished your lamps. In the morning, mist hung in the air as it does here today, a lamentation risen from the lawn. And was your blood so chilled that thoughts of the children dwelling in that yellow house on George Street could not unstop the fair accusations in your throats? Could not one of you have gone to him and said, "John, this is wrong"? Were you not duty-bound to knock at the door of that madness? I am looking at all of you here today, a blanket of light draped over us at this crossroads, the sun still rising. Go home with these thoughts in your minds, and blessings be eternal on any of you who did step forward then, the righteous. Though I did not know you, I am here by your kindness, in the name of the mother, the daughters, and the small black dog. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Tom Cull. Tom is a poet, creative writing professor, community organizer, and the current Poet Laureate of London. He's the author most recently of Bad Animals, and a previous and now, I know, quickly out of print chapbook from London's own Baseline Press, What the Badger Said. Tom has been involved in all kinds of things in London, including Words Fest, Poetry London, and he also, and I know this is very close to his heart, founded Thames River Rally with his partner and 6-year-old son. Emmett's not 6 anymore, though, is he?
He's 9.
He's 9, yeah. I was like, suddenly, this is like way too old. Thames River Valley is a volunteer organization that coordinates monthly cleanups of the Thames River and encourages partnerships with community organizations to protect and preserve green spaces across London. Tom's poetry, I think, is part and parcel of his community work. And he couches the topics that it takes up, the Thames River, masculinity, family, the lives of animals, in a wry humor that I think gets us to look a little bit more closely at ourselves.
Thank you. Thanks, Madeline. Thank you, Madeline, and thank you all for being here. Thank you to Words, and thank you to Deanna and Julie. It's a thrill to read with them both. Deanna mentioned Lucan, growing up in Lucan. My first poem starts in Lucan on a trip home to Huron County, where I grew up, kind of between Godrich and Wingham area. R1 Belgrave, actually, was the... it's called Huron County, and it's for Carrie Manders, a friend of mine, and we do these trips home. She grew up in Lucan. And so it's dedicated to her. Huron County. We rip the scab off at Lucan, bleed north, up number 4, Endorphin High. Remember? You remember the ditches, corn, windrows, picking stones in the same damn fields year after year. All the straight lines, grids, and you, all the while, behind the mask at home, calling for curves. We turn off the highway, gravel pops in the wheel wells, stop at your old house, stand on the dirt road, watch the August storm close. Fields of tassels bristle against the black horizon. At the graveyard where you necked boys on the bones, we set our lines amid the stones, but nothing's biting. Hit the road then, plunge deeper into whatever the hell this is. A trip home? You might as well piss into the wind. Well, okay then. Clandeboye, Exeter, Vanastra, Clinton, Lonsborough, Blythe, Belgrave, full cooler, camera, memory stick handling me a beer. We're here, my uncle's place, just up the road from our old house. The plan was to sneak onto the property, take photos of the hoop barns in the back meadow where the new owners grew the dope before they got busted by the cops. But the gates closed, locked, a truck's parked round back. Someone's living here. Fuck it, maybe we'll try tomorrow, after sundown. Trespassing is coming home. So now that we're home, I'm going to go to that house that is no longer ours, that was purchased by some entrepreneurs who one day we got a call from our old neighbors, and they said, "Oh, there's a lot of activity down at your old house. There's helicopters, there's dogs, there's 9 cruisers." Hell of a story. And it was largest outdoor grow-op in Ontario's history. $5 million up in smoke. This poem is called Baptist. Baptist. It is 1973. I am 2, my brother 5. My mother is 28. We sit on new brown carpet in the den. My mom wears polyester, vertical stripes, orange, yellow, lime green. My brother is reading a book. He is advanced, gifted. He likes to read signs. Every day on the school bus, he passes the same sign. It says, Baptist Church. He asks, "What's a Baptist?" My mom pauses, closes her eyes. She puts down her book. She is a 70s mom, grew up in Ottawa's Glebe, but was transported to the wilds of Huron County. Here, living in a huge log cabin, she faces down lake effect winters, United Church Sundays, community fowl suppers. She takes her son's questions seriously. He will have the answers he needs. My brother listens intently. She is methodical. My father, after dinner coffee in hand, walks by the doorway. He catches the soft tone of her voice. She is drawing something on a piece of paper. He continues downstairs to put wood in the furnace. The next day, the school bus drives by the Baptist church. My brother licks his cracked lips and says the word Baptist. The boy beside him says, "What?" That evening, the phone rings at dinner. 2 long rings for our house on the party line. It is the school principal, Mr. Long. The black coiled telephone cord follows my mom into the next room. My father hears something unfamiliar in her tone. That evening, the phone rings 3 more times. Bonnie Campbell, Dorothy Baker, Linda Chamney. My father puts us to bed. He sings, "Good night, Patrick. Good night, Tommy. Good night, kiddos. It's time to say good night." Later, my mom joins him on the couch. Exhausted, she stares at the fire. Tan, our yellow dog, begins to pant but doesn't move from the heat. My mother looks at the dog, then to my dad. As much to herself as anyone, she says, Baptist. She says it again, Baptist. Yes, my father says. My mom looks back into the fire, and not for the first time that evening, she says, I thought he said pap test. So that poem is based on true events. And my mom is here, so you can ask her afterwards. Julie read a poem. There was a lot of birds in her book, unintentionally. I thought that's a good name for a title of Unintentional Birds. Might be my next collection. I've got 2 short bird poems. Well, one's a bat, so two short flying animal poems. And the first one is Heron, and it's a new one, and I love your description of the heron in the poem you read. Heron. Kiwi birds dreamed the heron, fastened to a high branch of a naked white tree at the edge of a swamp. Ice pick slingshot, pterosaur unfolding, its great throaty yarp bristling even the swamp thing who feels a feathered shadow pass through its body like fishnets through water. Like a bat. Returning home from a night ride, the bat takes off his leathers, taut skin slips from skeletal hands, polishing the coral bones that glow in the dark like hands on a Swiss-made watch. He hangs the loose skin in the closet, then gibbets himself in a stony hug that slowly crushes the moth wings in his stomach to a fine white powder. So, I'm going to end with a poem, Tractor. I'm going to dedicate this to Uncle Jimmy. Uncle Jimmy is my wife's uncle who died 2 days ago, and she is now driving down the road to Ohio with our son Emmett to the visitation. And Uncle Jimmy was a firefighter. He was an arborist. He never married, didn't have any children. His children were his family, extended family, and his larger community. And everyone knew Uncle Jimmy, and there are 2.5 days of visitations because everyone knew Jimmy, and people will come. This poem, Tractor, is about a funeral, and I think he would approve. It's a response to William Carlos Williams' poem, Tract, which is also about funerals. Tractor, for Uncle Jimmy. I will tell you, my friends, how to throw a funeral. Start early, noon is dignified, there's much to do. The dead should be the first to arrive, seated at the front. Make room for everyone. Choose a good MC, someone who projects they want to hear at the back. Invite speakers, stories, songs, poems. Caro mio bien, ombra ma fu. Have mourners gnash and rend. People, this is a performance. Bring the band off the stage, seat them in the audience, sing, abide with me, guide me, oh. Make your decisions with confidence, I want to hear voices. Tap the kegs at 4 o'clock, make a bonfire, eat pork and beef and lamb and fish, eat everything. Sun sets at 9, bring out the dead in the bucket of the tractor, pour his ashes down the barrel of a potato gun and shoot him out over the river. Cheer, curse, cry, dance, drive your heels hard into the mud. If things get sexy, let them, save cleanup for morning. Take Advil, drink water, sleep, dream, every funeral a dress rehearsal. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for those really powerful and wonderful readings. We have 10 minutes. The time has just zipped by. So I think what I want to do is just kind of start off by kind of getting us all talking, and then I'll give you all a chance to ask questions, and if I need to jump in again, then I'll have more things you can ask. One of the things I wanted to say was how much I enjoyed reading your books and how much I enjoyed reading your books all together. Because when you do that, you see some really interesting, odd things that you would never see anywhere else. And so one of the things I noticed was the way in which you approach the question of home. And I think we've already heard a little bit about home from, especially from Deanna and Tom, who've both really given us that kind of local kind of looking back to a home. But all of you have at least one poem that takes us back to a former home that the speaker has left. And I thought, this is very interesting. You know, it's like some new genre of poem, that going back to an old house poem. Julie, you've got the poem Flipped in How to Avoid Huge Shifts. And that recounts your mother's reluctance to sell her house until she does, and then the new owners tear it down. You also have The Room, which ends with the line, "This house will be hard to sell." And in Monkey Ranch, you've got Maison Vendue, where the speaker is leaving a just-sold house. Deanna, in Reunion, you know, you go back to a childhood home in a kind of more general way. I sort of, when I think about Reunion, it's like there's a real complicated question about whether the home has fully left the speaker. You know, there's this interesting thing going on there. But in House Dreams, you've got the poem You Cannot Go In, which again takes us back to that sold house. Another woman is living in your house, it begins. And Tom, you've got On the Sale of My Farm and Huron County, which is the poem you began with, that takes us back to this old house on the sale of my farm. The speaker goes back to that. I would say, what's going on there? What's bringing you back to those old houses?
Heather McHugh, the American poet who's actually part Canadian, she taught at my grad school, and when I had moved to the States and was just sort of pining for the old country, as it were, she said to me, "You never leave a place. The place goes with you." And I think that's, it's probably partly a function of our ages, respectively, but we do take those environments, they're so internalized, I think, that they accompany us wherever we are. So, that's a short answer, but that would be, I think, mine. Yeah.
I would agree. The idea of home, my last book was called House Dreams, meaning dreams of houses, not dream houses. To me, it's about spatial memory, carrying home with you, emotion connected to physical place. For some people, it may not be specifically homes they go back to, but landscapes that are sort of the imaginative backdrop or heart of their work. So for me, it's even more localized into specific houses. In Reunion, I mentioned there are two poems called Reunion, set in the same house. And not, spoiler alert, the one short poem at the beginning of the book is in that house, which isn't described necessarily, but it's where the spirit of the poem is coming from. And then the long poem Reunion somewhat surprisingly to me, as it turned out as I was writing, ended in that same space, the idea of reunion. So it's so close to my aesthetic and my vision and my work that I don't even know how to talk about it almost. It's integral.
Just one quick thing before Tom answers. It's interesting in your work how just that incantation of the town names is so loaded. You know, it's so, I was getting chills hearing that. It was really...
It's about being in that car, you know, being in a car and seeing those place names. And that being just such an early memory of just, driving through the country and seeing, sign after sign after sign of those places. So I think the other thing about home for me is, I grew up on this very beautiful kind of idyllic piece of land, and a river ran through it, and my dad kind of found an old pioneer log cabin, and he picked it up, put it on a boom, and he moved it and attached it to the original house, which was pretty much falling apart. And then Mom and Dad moved there in like 1968, and then the rest of the next 15 to 20 years was about fixing it up and putting the blood, sweat, and tears into that actual house. Me growing up in this space, thinking I would never not have this space. It would always be, and not even having that thought, right? Because that thought, even to have that thought, you have to imagine it not being the case. And then, so it's about that, but it's also then being distanced from that even more, because I couldn't write about that for a long time, or felt too close. But then there's something about learning more about this area that I grew up in, East Wawanosh Township, and realizing I didn't know who Wawanosh was. I didn't know he was an Ojibwa chief. I didn't know any of the things. I didn't know that my land, the land that we had, bordered Territory 29 of the Huron Tract. And so this notion now of going home has become more problematized by the notion that, it was a trespassing home. That kind of dream I had of home was also premised on a kind of a colonial disremembering. And so that's what some of my newest work is about, is trying to kind of remember home in different ways, if that makes any sense.
I'd like to kind of open things up to the audience now. Yes.
Would you say home is
a collective emotional landscape of your experiences in a certain place?
A collective emotional landscape. I mean, my hope is that when you plumb your connection to home through language, that it taps into a collective sense of what home can represent, and that it becomes not only my home, but the reader's. So if that's what you mean, yes. Does that, yeah.
there's always the universal in our
One-
emotions.
One hopes. That's what, yeah.
I find that the idea of home and heritage creates a sense of realism that's magnificent. And then I wonder how in your creative process you lift this up into such strong, beautiful collection of images, because balancing the two is always a gift, isn't it?
I'm sorry, could you just say those keywords again to me?
The fact that it's rooted in realism, but then
Yes.
you lift it into the imagination and into the realm of dream, and for creating the most beautiful poetic images.
Okay, so the idea that evoking home perhaps lends itself to a sense of reality, realism.
I was thinking more just the juxtaposition of the two abilities.
Right.
Remain in realism, but also
Right.
lift it into the imagined of the dream.
Yes.
To make these sensational images are also not gripping is the wrong word, but invested with emotion? And what kind of creative process do you need to be able to
okay.
make that successful?
The creative process of
Yes.
evoking that, yeah. Well, I think probably like any artistic endeavor, it's a mystery. So when writing, to imagine being, it's almost like, for me, sometimes when it's happening, when it's generative and the creative juice is flowing, it's an exercise and maybe a relinquishing of control. And so for me, if I'm writing about, say, home or a specific place, is to imaginatively transport myself back there and write from within it, you know? And I think only through getting inside something can you have, you know, the most potential to evoke its true spirit and let that emerge. So like I wrote in one of my poems just now, which one was it? I forget. But maybe I'll let you pick up on that, Julie. You were talking about that.
About getting inside things.
Inside,
Yeah,
yes.
sometimes I find that a poem starts from an obsession with a particular image or memory, and it's usually very sensory orientation. And I have a poem in this book about a memory of peeling the wallpaper when I was a child. And it used to drive my mother crazy. And I had this pink and white wallpaper, and I would just chip away at it with my nails at night. And my mother had all this extra paper she kept patching it with, right? And sometimes the process of finding the poem is discovering what that is a metaphor for, in a sense. She had things she papered over in her life, and eventually these two things coming together, this really visceral memory of that gluey, varnishy stuff, what it felt like under your fingernails, and some thoughts about what was going on in my mother's adult life at that time that I wasn't aware of then, coming together. And so the finding of the poem is the coming together, often for me, of that glass of milk, you know, and what it really represents to me, and the process of bringing those two things together. So it's really an excavation and at best a discovery, process of discovery. So.
Unfortunately, it is 1 o'clock. I feel like our conversation has just begun. I'm sure that Tom, Deanna, and Julie will be available to talk to you after this session. They'll be around to sign your books, and you'll see them again over the weekend. Please thank Tom.
Everybody, please stay in your seats. We're going to let Julie and Deanna leave first, so that otherwise you won't